My name is Eleanor Morrison. I'm 62 years old, and my son, the boy whose childhood drawings I still keep in a box, told me to get out of his house and his life just days after my husband of 35 years left me for his secretary. He said it with a straight face while his wife smirked behind him, telling me the family business was theirs now. What they didn't know was that their greed had just handed me back the keys to the entire kingdom. I'm telling this story from my new apartment in Chicago. It's a little past 9 a.m. here on a crisp autumn morning. The coffee is warm in my hands, and for the first time in a long time, the silence feels like peace, not loneliness. It's a feeling I thought I might never have again. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let me know in the comments. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little friendlier, and right now, that means a great deal to me. It all started on a Tuesday, a day that will forever be etched in my memory as the day my old life officially died. The final divorce papers, signed and sealed, sat in a heavy manila envelope on my passenger seat. Each time I stopped at a red light, my eyes would drift to it. It didn't seem real. 35 years of marriage, of shared holidays and inside jokes, of holding his hand through sickness and celebrating his promotions, all reduced to a stack of paper filled with cold, legal jargon. Richard was gone, vanished from my life only to reappear in gossip columns on the arm of a 25-year-old named Amanda, his former secretary, a woman with bright lipstick and an even brighter, predatory smile. My new apartment, a small two-bedroom I'd found that was a fraction of the size of the home I'd lost, wouldn't be ready for another week. The movers had already taken my furniture, my life packed into boxes, and stored in a sterile facility. I was, for all intents and purposes, homeless. So I did what any mother in my position would do. I drove to the one place I thought would always be a sanctuary. I drove to my son's house. Michael and Jennifer lived in a beautiful two-story colonial in a manicured suburban neighborhood, the kind of house with a 3-car garage and a lawn that was always impossibly green. I remembered the day they bought it, 5 years ago. They had been so excited, but their savings weren't quite enough for the down payment. I didn't hesitate. I took the money my own mother had left me, my inheritance, and gave it to them. "Mom, we'll pay you back," Michael had said, his face earnest as he hugged me in the real estate agent's office. "Nonsense, darling," I had told him, stroking his share. "This isn't a loan. This is what family does. You're building a future, and I want to be a part of it." Jennifer had kissed my cheek, her smile dazzling. "You're the best mother-in-law in the world, Eleanor," she had cooed. Now, standing on their perfectly swept flagstone porch, my small overnight bag at my feet, those memories felt like a cruel joke. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and rang the bell. The cheerful chime echoed the hollowness inside me. Michael opened the door. At 35, he was a handsome man with the same dark, wavy hair he'd had as a boy. But the warmth I remembered in his eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded, impenetrable coolness. He didn't smile. He didn't move to let me in. He simply stood there, blocking the doorway. "Mum," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Michael, honey," I started, my own voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "The divorce is final. My place, my new apartment, isn't ready for a few more days. I was wondering, could I possibly stay here? Just for a little while. I'll stay in the guest room. I won't be any trouble." As I spoke, Jennifer appeared behind him, a vision in cream-colored silk blouse and tailored slacks. She wrapped her arm around Michael's, a gesture that looked less like affection and more like a handler steadying a guard dog. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with a syrupy false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "We heard about the divorce. What a terrible shame." "I just need a place to sleep for a few nights," I repeated, my gaze fixed on my son, pleading with him to see the mother standing before him, not just an inconvenience. "The guest room is empty, isn't it?" Michael's jaw tightened. He finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. It was pure, unadulterated annoyance, as if I were a door-to-door salesman, a complete stranger interrupting his evening. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice taking on a hard, dismissive edge. "Let's just be honest here. Thank God he left you. You're holding him back for years with your old-fashioned ideas. Now pack your bags and leave our family." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I stumbled back a step, my hand flying to my chest as if to hold my heart in place. "Leave? Your family?" I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Michael, I am your family." Jennifer's smirk widened into a full, triumphant smile. It was the smile of a chess player who has just cornered the queen. "The company is ours now, Eleanor," she said, her voice laced with venomous satisfaction. "Richard made sure Michael got it in the divorce settlement. You're not part of the business anymore. And if you're not part of the business, you're not part of us anymore." I stared at them, this monstrous, two-headed creature of greed and cruelty, framed in the doorway of the home I had helped buy. And in that moment of profound shock, a strange, icy calm washed over me. The pain was still there, a roaring inferno in my chest, but something else was rising through the flames. A cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an execution. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything from me. My eyes drifted past Michael's shoulder into the beautifully decorated hallway. On the wall hung a printed portrait of my own father, the man who founded Morrison Manufacturing, the man whose name they had so eagerly erased from the company letterhead. They thought that was enough. They thought a name change in a divorce decree could rewrite history. I pulled my shoulders back, straightened my spine, and met Jennifer's gloating gaze. My voice, when it came out, was surprisingly steady, almost a whisper, but it cut through the tension. "Are you sure you understand the company, Jennifer?" I asked, a genuine, quiet question. "All of it?" The smirk on her face faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion, of irritation that I wasn't dissolving into a puddle of tears, crossed her eyes before the arrogance returned full force. "We understand everything that matters," she said with finality. And then, with Michael's silent, stone-faced compliance, she slowly, deliberately, closed the heavy oak door in my face. The final quiet click of the lock echoed the sound of my heart shattering into a million pieces. As I turned and walked away from that perfect house on that perfect street, the manicured lawns blurring through my tears, a memory surfaced, so sharp and clear it felt like yesterday. It was the day of my father's funeral, 20 years ago. A gray, drizzly afternoon. Michael was just a teenager, awkward in his first real suit. He stood beside me at the graveside, crying silently as they lowered the casket. I had pulled him close, my arm around his trembling shoulders. "Your grandfather built more than a company, Michael," I had told him, my voice thick with my own grief. "He built a name, Morrison. It stands for integrity, for quality, for treating people right. That's your real inheritance. Don't you ever forget that." He had nodded, his young face earnest and full of sorrow. "I won't, Mom. I promise." Now, standing on the curb, the engine of my car a low hum, my overnight bag feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, I realized he hadn't just forgotten the lesson. He and his wife had taken that promise, that sacred inheritance, and set it on fire. And I, his mother, was just collateral damage in their bonfire of greed. There's a special kind of anonymity that can only be found in a cheap motel room on the desolate edge of town. It's in the sour smell of stale cigarette smoke and industrial-strength cleaner, a scent that clings to everything. It's in the relentless rattling hum of the ancient air conditioner unit under the window, a sound that seems to amplify the silence. It's in the threadbare, scratchy bedspread, a faded floral pattern that has likely witnessed 1,000 other lonely, desperate nights. This was my new reality. Room 107 of the Starlight Motor Inn. My new kingdom of beige, water-stained walls and flickering fluorescent lights. I sat on the edge of the stiff, unforgiving mattress, my small bag still unopened on the floor. It felt too final to unpack. The woman at the front desk, a tired-looking blonde with a name tag that read Brenda, had looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional disinterest. Her eyes had lingered for a moment too long on my pearl earrings and the silk scarf around my neck, items that screamed of a different life, a different world. They were as out of place here as I was. I paid in cash for 3 nights, the crisp $20 bills feeling like a tangible admission of my fall from grace. My first act in this sad little room was to call my best friend Margaret. We had been friends for 40 years, ever since our sons were in kindergarten together, building lopsided Lego towers. She was my rock, the one person in the world I knew I could be completely, messily honest with. She picked up on the second ring, her voice brisk and warm. "Eleanor? I've been trying your cell all afternoon. Where are you? Are you okay?" The dam broke. The composure I had clung to since leaving Michael's house crumbled into dust. A wave of gut-wrenching sobs escaped me so violent that they shook my entire body. "He kicked me out," I finally managed to choke out, the words catching in my throat. "Michael, he and Jennifer, they threw me out. They told me I wasn't family anymore." I could hear her sharp, furious intake of breath on the other end of the line. "That little monster!" she seethed, her voice a low growl. I could picture her perfectly, standing in her sunny kitchen, her knuckles probably white as she gripped the phone. "That venomous little social climber he married. I swear, Eleanor, I'm going to—" She cut herself off. There was a pause, and then her voice softened, filled with concern. "Tell me where you are. Right now. I'm coming to get you." "No," I said, wiping my streaming eyes with the back of my hand. The gesture felt futile, like trying to mop up the ocean. "I need a minute. I'm at the Starlight, off the highway." "The Starlight?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Eleanor, you can't be serious. That place is a run-down dump. You come stay with me right now. The guest room is all made up." "I can't," I insisted, though a part of me, the broken, exhausted part, desperately wanted to sink into the comfort of her home, to let her take care of me. Margaret was silent for a moment. She knew me better than anyone. She knew about the stubborn core of pride that ran through me, a trait I inherited from my father. I couldn't bear the thought of being a burden, of weeping on her sofa while her husband, Bill, looked on with awkward sympathy. "Fine," she finally said, her voice tight with a righteous anger that was all on my behalf. "But you listen to me, Eleanor Morrison. You have been ignoring the signs for years. That woman has been sinking her poisonous claws into Michael since the day they met. And you, with your endless patience and your unshakable belief in the good in everyone, you just let it happen. You made excuses for them." Her words stung with the sharp, clean pain of truth. I had. Oh, how I had. I had hosted countless family dinners where Jennifer made passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my clothes, my home. I had watched her subtly steer Michael away from our cherished family traditions, the annual trip to the lake, the chaotic Christmas Eve gatherings, replacing them with lavish, exclusive vacations to places like St. Bart's, where I was never invited. I had seen the hungry glint in her eyes when she discussed the company's quarterly profits, a look I had foolishly chosen to interpret as ambition for her husband, not avarice for herself. I had made endless excuses. "He loves her," I'd told myself 1,000 times. "She's just from a different background. She's just trying to find her place." "You've forgotten who you are, Eleanor," she continued, her voice rising with passion. "You're not some helpless little bird who's fallen out of the nest. You are a Morrison. Your father was one of the smartest,
toughest, most decent men I ever knew, and you have more of him in you than you give yourself credit for. You just need to find it again." We talked for a few more minutes. Her fiery words were a strange and welcome comfort. They were like a splash of cold water on my face. After we hung up, I lay back on the lumpy, unforgiving bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The patterns looked like a map of a foreign country, a place I never wanted to visit. The anger Margaret had stoked was a welcome change from the hollow, consuming ache of betrayal. She was right. I had let this happen. I had become so wrapped up in the roles I played, wife, mother, homemaker, that I had forgotten how to simply be Eleanor. I had handed over my power, my voice, my very identity, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to take.
I thought about Jennifer's triumphant, vicious smile. "The company is ours now." The words echoed in the cheap, silent room. They had been planning this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision fueled by the raw emotions of my divorce. This was a coup, a cold and calculated plot that had been years in the making. And the most painful, soul-crushing part was that my own son, my only child, was the lead conspirator. The boy whose scraped knees I had kissed and bandaged, whose college fund I had sacrificed my own savings for, whose wedding I had wept at with pure, unadulterated joy. He had chosen her. He had chosen money and status and a life filled with shiny, empty things over his own mother. A cold, hard fury began to replace the grief. It started as a small, tight knot in the pit of my stomach and slowly spread through my veins like ice, pushing out the despair, making me shiver. I sat up, my back ramrod straight. I would not let them win. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what I could possibly do, but the thought of letting them get away with this, of them sitting in their beautiful home, laughing about the old woman they had so easily discarded, was utterly and completely unacceptable. With a newfound resolve, I got up and unzipped my bag. I took out my toiletries and arranged them with defiant precision on the small, chipped sink in the bathroom. I hung my spare blouse in the tiny, musty closet. They were small acts, symbolic gestures of defiance, a way of claiming this miserable little room as my own temporary fortress. I was not defeated. I was wounded, yes, deeply, but I was not broken. As I looked at my reflection in the cheap, cloudy mirror, a face I barely recognized, pale and tear-streaked but with a new, hard glint in the eyes, I made a silent promise to the woman staring back at me. They would regret this. They would regret ever underestimating Eleanor Morrison. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal, timeless blur. My world had shrunk to the 4 beige walls of room 107. I existed on a diet of bad coffee from the machine in the lobby and a growing, simmering rage. The highway outside my window provided a constant, monotonous soundtrack, the whoosh of cars and trucks, a reminder that the world was still moving on, even though mine had ground to a screeching halt. I tried to read the paperback Margaret had insisted I take, but the words swam meaninglessly on the page. I tried to watch television, but the cheerful, mindless sitcoms with their perfect families and easily solved problems felt like a personal insult. Mostly, I just sat and let the waves of grief and anger wash over me, each one leaving me a little more numb, a little colder, a little harder. My son, my own son, had cast me aside like a piece of old, unwanted furniture. The thought was a constant, dull ache in my chest, a wound that refused to close. I replayed the scene at his front door 100 times in my head, dissecting every word, every look, his cold eyes, Jennifer's smug smile, the final deafening click of the lock. Little did I know that was only the beginning of their betrayal. On the second evening, just as I was contemplating the sad, greasy-looking menu from a local pizza delivery place, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't recognize the number, but something compelled me to answer it. My voice was hoarse from disuse. "Hello?"
Mrs. Morrison? Eleanor? This is David Chen. My mind, foggy from lack of sleep and an excess of sorrow, scrambled for a moment to place the name. David Chen. Of course. David had been with Morrison Manufacturing for over 30 years. He had started in the mailroom right out of high school, a shy, hardworking kid. My father had seen his potential and mentored him personally. Now he was the director of operations, a quiet, decent, intensely capable man who was fiercely loyal to the company and the principles it was founded on. David, I said, my voice clearing as I sat up straighter, it's so good to hear your voice. Is everything all right? There was a significant pause on the other end of the line, long enough for me to know that everything was, in fact, not all right. Honestly, Eleanor, no, he finally said, and I could hear the deep stress in his voice. That's why I'm calling. I hope you don't mind. I got your new cell phone number from Margaret's husband, Bill. He said you might need to hear from a friend. Of course not, David. I'm glad you called. What is it? Is it about Michael? Yes, he said, and then the words came out in a rush, as if he could no longer hold them back. Look, I know this is a terribly difficult time for you, and the last thing you need is trouble from the office, but things are, well, to be blunt, it's mostly his wife, I think, is making some incredibly reckless decisions. I gripped the plastic phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. What kind of decisions? He let go of 5 of our most senior department heads this morning, Eleanor. Men like Frank in accounting and Jim in logistics. Men with decades of experience who knew this business inside and out. He called them into his office one by one and told them the company was moving in a new, dynamic direction and their services were no longer required. He was trimming the fat, he said. David's voice was laced with disgust. Then, at an all-hands meeting this afternoon, he announced a multi-million-dollar plan to gut the main offices and build some kind of new glass and steel monstrosity. A vanity project, Eleanor. There's no operational need for it. And he's alienating our biggest clients. He canceled the annual golf outing with Mr. Abernathy from Sterling Corp., a client that your father landed in 1978. Said he was too busy revolutionizing the industry to play games. Abernathy was insulted, and he's threatening to pull his contract. Every word was a fresh stab of betrayal. Michael wasn't just taking over. He was actively, gleefully dismantling my father's legacy, piece by piece, like a spoiled child smashing a priceless antique. But this, David said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more urgent, this is the reason I had to call you tonight. He's trying to leverage the main building, Eleanor, the one on Morrison Drive. He's applied for a massive business loan to fund this ridiculous renovation, and he's using the property, the land, and the building itself as collateral. I overheard him telling Jennifer on the phone that the final approval from the bank should come through in the next 72 hours. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty motel room. The building on Morrison Drive wasn't just a collection of bricks and mortar. It was the heart of the company. It was the land my father had bought when it was nothing but a muddy field, a purchase everyone said was foolish. It was where I'd spent my summers as a girl, helping him file papers and breathing in the smell of sawdust and hard work. If he leveraged that property, David continued, his voice tight with anxiety, and his grand plans fail, which they will, the bank could take everything. We'd lose control of our core asset. It would be the end of the company as we know it, Eleanor. The absolute end.
The pizza menu slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. The dull ache in my chest was gone, obliterated by a surge of pure adrenaline. This was no longer just about my personal pain, my wounded pride. This was about my father's life's work. It was about the jobs and livelihoods of hundreds of employees like David Chen who had dedicated their lives to that company. Michael and Jennifer weren't just being cruel to me. They were a cancer, eating away at the very soul of the business. The 72-hour timeline wasn't just a deadline. It was a ticking bomb. David, I said, my voice suddenly clear and firm, the fog of grief completely burned away. Thank you. You did the right thing by calling me. You are a good man. Can I count on you to be my eyes and ears inside for the next couple of days? Of course, Eleanor, he said, and the relief that flooded his voice was palpable. Whatever you need. We miss you here. We miss what this place used to stand for. I'm going to fix this, David, I promised, though in that moment I had absolutely no idea how. I'm going to stop him. Tell no one about this call. Not a soul. Your secret is safe with me. After we hung up, I stood up and began to pace the small, cramped room like a caged animal. The grief and helplessness that had paralyzed me for 2 days were gone, replaced by a white-hot, protective rage. They had gone too far. They had laid their greedy, destructive hands on the one thing I could not and would not let them destroy. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts, my thumb moving with a new, decisive purpose. My finger hovered over one name. Arthur Davies, my father's lawyer for 40 years, and the executor of his will. I hadn't spoken to him since shortly after the funeral, when he had handled the transfer of my inheritance. He was semi-retired now, but Margaret had mentioned he still took on special cases for old, favorite clients. This, I decided with grim certainty, was a very special case. I pressed the call button. It was time to stop being a victim. It was time to fight back. The clock was ticking. Arthur Davis's office was located in an old, respectable brick building downtown, the kind with a real wood-paneled lobby, polished brass fixtures, and a faint, pleasant smell of old paper, leather, and lemon polish. It was a world away from the Starlight Motor Inn and its lingering scent of desperation. When I walked in, his longtime secretary, a kind, silver-haired woman named Mrs. Gable, greeted me with a warm, sympathetic smile that made me feel instantly seen. "Eleanor, dear, it's been too long. Arthur is waiting for you." Arthur was standing by the large window of his corner office, looking out at the city skyline. He was a tall, stooped man in his late 70s, with a shock of unruly light hair and the calm, steady eyes of someone who has seen every form of human folly and is surprised by nothing. He turned as I entered, and his face, etched with the lines of a long and thoughtful life, broke into a gentle smile. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He took both my hands in his grip surprisingly firm. "I was so sorry to hear about you and Richard, and even sorrier to hear what Michael did. Margaret called me yesterday. She was spitting fire." "She's a good friend," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was relief, I think. The relief of being in a safe harbor after a terrible storm. "That she is," he agreed, guiding me to a comfortable, deep-seated leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. "Now, tell me everything. Start from the beginning." And so I did. I poured it all out. The humiliating scene at Michael's front door, the cold, cruel dismissal, and finally, the alarming, urgent news from David Chen about the loan, the renovation, and the 72-hour deadline. Arthur listened patiently, his hands steepled under his chin, his expression thoughtful and unreadable. He didn't interrupt once. He just let me talk until the torrent of words and pain subsided into a shaky silence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound, and rose from his desk. He walked over to a large, imposing black safe in the corner of the room, spun the dial with a series of practiced clicking sounds, and pulled out a thick, heavy, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the polished mahogany desk in front of me with a soft, definitive thud. Embossed on the cover in faded gold leaf were 2 words that made my breath catch. Morrison Holdings. "Eleanor," he said, sitting down in his own chair opposite me, "I need you to think back 20 years. It was a difficult time for you, shortly after your father's funeral. Do you remember a meeting we had? Right here, in this office. It was you, me, and Richard." I frowned, trying to pierce the fog of grief that still shrouded that period of my life. "Vaguely," I admitted. "We were settling my father's estate, finalizing the details of my inheritance." "Yes," Arthur said, nodding slowly. "But we discussed more than that. We talked about the future of the company. Your father, in his last months, was worried. He saw a certain entitlement in Michael, even then as a boy, and he was wary of the larger corporations that were trying to buy him out. So, we devised a plan, a strategy to protect the family legacy, to build a fortress around it. He opened the portfolio. Inside were dozens of pages of dense legal documents, filled with clauses and subclauses. He turned to one near the front, a charter document. We restructured the entire business. We created a parent corporation, a holding company called Morrison Holdings. This new entity owns all the core, invaluable assets, the land the factory sits on, the building itself, all the patents for your father's designs, the brand name, and most importantly, all the long-term, high-value client contracts. The company you know, the one that was eventually renamed Richard & Sudden Manufacturing, is simply an operational subsidiary. It functions by leasing all of its essential assets from the parent company. I stared at him, my mind struggling to grasp the implications. It sounded like a shell game. I don't understand, Arthur. What does all this mean? He leaned forward, his calm eyes locking onto mine. It means, Eleanor, that the company Michael inherited in the divorce settlement is a house of cards, a car with no engine. It has employees and operating accounts and a fancy name, but it owns nothing of real, tangible value. All the power, all the actual wealth, resides with Morrison Holdings. He slid a document across the desk towards me. It was the corporate charter. He pointed to a signature line at the bottom. And this, he said quietly, his voice resonating with significance, is the most important part of the structure we created. We established a board of directors for Morrison Holdings, and we named you, his only child, as the permanent, unremovable chairwoman of the board. I stared at my own signature, written in a graceful, loopy